You are watching Park TV. Welcome to Monadnock Tonight with your host, Steve Jackson, coming to you live from the Park Theater in downtown Jaffrey, New Hampshire. Join Steve and his guest today, documentary film editor James STEELMAN. Kindly sit back, relax, and here's Steve.
Well, hello, everybody. And greetings, and good to see everyone. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Park Theater and Park TV's Monadnock Tonight. It is Thursday, October 8th, 2020, and it's about 5 p.m. here on the East Coast of America. And this is show number 51, number 51. And yes, I am Steve Jackson. I'm the CEO of the Park Theater, and as always, your host for Monadnock Tonight. And we are so glad that you can join us. It's going to be a fun program and informative. Our guest today is a highly talented individual involved in the production of some extremely important documentary films in the past several recent years. And I think you're going to enjoy our chat uh, with him. But first, we have got some notes that we wanted to go over with you. I think a lot of our audience is aware of, he was a guest on the show earlier in the year. He was one of our celebrity panelists on our telethon over the summer in July. And he is just a wildly big supporter of the Park Theater and certainly the arts in general, but of the park. And that is Mr. Ernest Thompson. And the reason that I am mentioning Ernest today is because, and I know some friends of ours in the audience have done this previously, but Ernest does writing workshops up at his home north of us, and he is doing it again, but he's doing it this time virtually. And just to remember who Ernest, if I don't need to usually say much more about Ernest other than he's an Oscar winner who wrote On Golden Pond, first as a play and then winning an Oscar for the adaptation of the play into a film. And from November 6th to the 8th, he will do his writing workshop called What's Your Story? And if you ever wanted to write a screenplay, this is the time, or write a play, to be mentored by one of the best. And I did put a post on this on our Facebook timeline today. So if you scroll down, you can find out more details about it. But support our friend, and you're going to support yourself if you're interested in writing screenplays or plays, or being a playwright. And I hope there are some folks out there that are interested in doing that, no matter what your age. And then what else do we have going on? Well, we call it kind of Scaretober because we are in October. It's Scaretober at the Park Theater. And so our free virtual film curating area online called Park Pixflix, we will have a series of fun, free Halloween oriented films every week this month. And to start us off, we have a 1962 black and white classic. It was just posted to Facebook where you can access it, watch it online, or beam it up to your big screen TV. It's called Carnival of Souls. And I think it's high at this point. It didn't. I don't think they intended it to be high camp, but it is high camp, and it gets an 86 on 86% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. But let's take a look at the original trailer, and here it goes.
Good luck, Mary. Stop by and see us the next time you're in.
Thank you, but I'm never coming back.
I don't know about that girl.
How do you mean?
Day before yesterday, she was the only one of 3 girls to survive an accident. You'd think she'd feel a little something. Maybe in her place, I'd do the same thing. Just pick up life again. But I still say she's behaving strangely.
I have no desire for the close company of other people.
My dear, you cannot live in isolation from the human race.
Who's the man in the hall?
Maybe you heard the boards pop or something.
I didn't hear him, Mrs. Thomas. I saw him.
There's nobody there.
He's been following me, that's all there is to it.
That old pavilion out by the lake. Somehow you associate it with all this, don't you?
There was someone else there. That strange man was there.
Hysteria won't solve anything. Now control yourself.
You think I imagined all of it, don't you? You think I'm insane?
I didn't say that. I don't mean that.
That's just what I need. Get mixed up with some girls off a rocker.
I don't want to be left alone.
Well, if she's got a problem, it'll go right along with her.
Well, speaking of Oscars, maybe they weren't up for any Oscars for that film, but I just don't know why not. You could say that's overacting. You could say they knew exactly what they wanted. But it's fun, and you'll get a kick out of it. It's over on, you can go to theparktheater.org, and in the top right, there's a little navigation that says Park Pix Flicks. Tap on it. It's the first film. There's lots of other films from previous weeks behind it. Also, there on that nav bar has been updated. If you're looking for Route 124 programs, it's right next to it. And right next to that is this show, Monadnock Tonight. If you want to see any of the 50, and as of tomorrow or later tonight, the 51 shows we've done with Monadnock Tonight, you can catch them all with those links at theparktheater.org. Next, just who's coming up in the next few weeks. We have got Michelle Stahl, who's been on the show before, who's going to give us a little bit of history, regional history, with the she's from the Monadnock Center for History and Culture, about of Halloween in the area of Monadnock. And then we also have on October 29th, Mary Beth Hallinan, who does on Wednesday mornings, does an online 30-minute circle of guided meditations. She owns Fundamentally Harmonic and runs the Two Rivers Community Choir, and she will be on the 29th. And then cellist Andrew Katrubis will be on in November. We've got him booked coming up. But all that aside, but please make note, let's get to today, and let's introduce our guest for today. Our guest is a New Hampshire native, now working as a professional freelance editor in the television industry with over 50 broadcast credits. And his latest credit is Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich, which is currently on Netflix. And we had the trailer on Facebook, I think yesterday and today. So if you have Netflix and if you haven't looked at it, highly recommended. But let us welcome Mr. James STEELMAN, and let's see if the miracle happens. There is James. Good evening, James.
Good evening, Steve.
Good to see you. Good to see you. James lives, even though you will hear shortly about his connection to the Monadnock region, New Hampshire. James lives in Brooklyn, and things are a little tough down there, you're telling me right now, in terms of COVID and hotspots, and you're kind of in the middle of one.
I'm afraid that's true. Yeah, I'm in the neighborhood of Bensonhurst, and we're on the short list of problematic neighborhoods in the city at the moment. So, I mean, it doesn't mean a whole lot for me. I've largely been staying indoors anyway, but it's a little discomforting to know that we're having a resurgence of it when we seem to have it under control.
Yeah, well, we wish you the best, and hopefully you, as well as everyone, that we're going to start to get out of this as the vaccines are approved in the over the next several months, and they start being um, administered. So we pray that they do, and hopefully that we keeps moving in a positive direction on that side of things. Um, Now, yeah, I always like to ask the guests, James, and before we get into the world that they're in today, whatever that might be, music, film, their vocation, their backgrounds. And I can tell you that James has an incredibly interesting story as a background for someone who now is in the film business. His dad, I would say by a lot of standards. He's kind of an independent theater legend. He was the manager of a theater up in Concord, and but then he's moved on, and he was one of the founders of the Red River Theaters, which I'm sure many in our audience have been to, in Concord, where he still programs today. But I am going to now, with that intro, I'm going to turn it over to you, James, that tell us about what it's a life when the family business is a movie theater and you're growing up in Concord. What was that like? And please tell us about your father as well and the rest of your family too.
Well, I have to say it was a lot of fun. Uh, and it got especially fun when I was 8 years old in 1977 when he played the movie Star Wars, and it turned out to be the biggest hit he'd ever had in his theater. And it was so big that he had to ask his four sons to help clean up the auditorium in between screenings because he was selling out literally every screening of the show. And with only I can't remember exactly, maybe 15 or 20 minutes in between screenings, he employed his sons to go and rush in and try to get as much of the popcorn off the floors as possible in between screenings. And from my end of it, I got to see Star Wars 4 or 5 times a day for about 6 weeks straight, and it definitely changed my life. I think that's when I realized that in some way, shape, or form, I wanted to have something to do with this industry, which I consider the storytelling industry, whether it's for the television screen or for a movie theater screen. It's all about telling stories. And more than that, my dad was also a collector of 16 millimeter films. He's been a movie buff his entire life. And so we had a screening room in our house, a 16 millimeter screening room in our living room. And he would frequently show us movies that he felt we needed to see. And so this is going back way even before VCRs were common.
Right.
His little brothers would have a birthday party. Part of the party would include a screening of a film. So we'd all sit in the living room and watch Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein or something fun like that on a big screen in our living room. So it was pretty neat.
And when you were talking about the sellouts of your father's theater, if I'm right, that I was reading about the theater, it was almost 500-seat theater. So we're talking a big theater.
It was pretty good size. Yeah, it was just under 500 seats. Yep.
Wow.
And again, he'd never seen business like that, and the industry had never seen anything quite like that.
Yeah.
his only competition at that time, if I recall correctly, was the Concord Theater on Main Street, and the woman who ran that theater wasn't interested in Star Wars. Nobody thought Star Wars was going to do any business, and it had a little bit of a reputation. It had been trouble plagued during its production, and so he took a chance and played it, and he was very happy that he did.
But as you're telling me, one of the things that's the positive side of Star Wars, but for small theaters, it began to change the complexion of how business was done with independent theaters.
Absolutely. It was at that point that the multiplex cinema really started to become commonplace in America. And even in the relatively small city of Concord, New Hampshire, Star Wars was enough to convince somebody to build a multiplex theater in Concord. And that had a rather detrimental effect on my dad's business. He wasn't really able to compete with a chain in order to book the kinds of films that would keep his business prosperous. And luckily, he didn't give up. He decided to turn his theater into an art house and began showing the kinds of movies that you wouldn't find in a multiplex: foreign films, classic films, art films that wouldn't get wide releases. And he programmed his theater that way for years. And again, it was lucky for me because as a film lover, as someone who was literally taught to love film from a very young age, I was exposed to a lot of stuff that I'm sure I never would have even heard of had I not been lucky enough to be growing up in that environment.
Yeah. I can imagine that's an education. Well, we're going to get into your education in a little bit, but that is an education in itself. And your father also did something which was very novel at the time, that he actually began selling and renting VHS films in the lobby of the theater.
That's right. And that got a little crazy. We started off with just maybe 100, 150 videotapes. But it really grew quickly. By the time, and that video business wound up outliving the movie theater. The movie theater was gone, and he had moved his video business into downtown Concord at that point. But I think what appealed to him about that was that he was able to curate a collection of films that would make a good library, and that there would always be something there for somebody to watch. I think maybe he was a little frustrated when he would go to video stores because he would notice that the selection wasn't what it should be. And what do you mean you don't have Casablanca? I want to show my kids Casablanca. And so he started that as a way of generating a little extra revenue, but it turned into something that he really loved. And again, it was another avenue for me to be able to explore areas of cinema that I wouldn't have known about otherwise.
Yeah. Tell us from there, your education, at least from the college standpoint. You went to Keene State, and tell us from there, and then eventually came back to Keene State to teach.
Sure. I took a few years off after high school. I wasn't really ready for college. I have to admit, I was a little bit of a wild child. So I sowed my wild oats for a few years, and then when I finally decided I was ready to take college seriously, my choices were a little limited. It was going to have to be a state school, and Keene State was the only one that offered a degree in film studies, and that's really the only thing I was interested in. And so I enrolled in 1991 and got my bachelor's degree. Had a great time there. It was a tremendous program, very small. It was much smaller then than it is today. But when I graduated in 1996, I knew I wanted to be an editor. I was lucky enough to score one job as an assistant editor on an independent feature that was being shot in Vermont. and it was being shot on film, and it was being edited on film. And I had learned how to manage an editing room thanks to a brilliant editor and instructor at that time named Paul Barnes. Paul Barnes was the primary editor for Ken Burns. He edited the Civil War, baseball, and he had done several features prior to that as well. So I had the necessary training to manage an editing room for a feature. And I did that, and it was great. And I even got paid. It was my first summer after graduating. I thought I was going to be on Easy Street, and my career was off to a great start. But then I discovered that nobody was really doing it that way anymore. By that time, that was late 96, early 97, the industry had largely converted to digital technology. Yeah. And most films and even television shows at that point were being edited on something called Avid. And everywhere I went looking for editing work, they asked me, do you know Avid? And I didn't have any idea what Avid was or how it worked. So I struggled for a few years and was doing all kinds of odd jobs and was very frustrated until finally in 2000, I was very fortunate to get hired by Avid Technology, which, as it turned out, was headquartered in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. And at that time, they were really the only professional digital editing system that was widely used. And they were so popular that they were able to hire tech support representatives and spend 6 months training them. And so I learned how to use Avid at Avid Technology, and I was paid to do it.
Wow.
And it was fantastic. It was very exciting. So I did that for about 2 years. And then one day I was speaking with my friends, Larry Benequist and Tom Cook from Keene State College, and from their film program. Right. And I said, guys, you really should be teaching your kids how to use this Avid thing, because this is the way it's done now. Yeah. And lo and behold, they said, well, why don't you come back and help us get it set up and teach our kids how to use it? And so I wound up doing that. I returned to Keene State College as a professor. Well, I'm not a professor. I didn't have a master's, so I was a professor per se. I was an instructor and a technician, and I taught classes in editing as well as provide tech support to the students who were using Avid. Yeah. And then after a little while, they trusted me enough to let me teach a couple of intro to film history classes, as well as some other production classes. And that was a great time. I wound up spending about 6 years there as a teacher, and it was fantastic. And then I decided it was time to become an editor.
And quite an editor you've been. If anyone, I know a lot of our audience goes to IMDb to look up films and individuals' work. And if you look up James Steelman, you're going to see a long list. You've been involved in episodic reality, but you've been involved in a lot of documentaries. And you've been involved in some of that episodic that became wildly popular, which was like Tiny House Nation. How did that come about?
Well, when I decided that I was done with Keene State College, the first thing I did was move to Los Angeles. That was in 2000. That was late 2007. I had a good friend there who I had worked with at Avid. He was actually my supervisor at Avid. And several years earlier, he had moved out to LA to pursue his career in editing, but he was focusing on television. And so I went out there, and thanks to him, I was able to land my first professional editing job on a really small show that was for the Swedish television market, if you can believe that. But that kind of opened the door for me to getting other gigs slowly, gradually, building my resume up a little bit. But I didn't really care for Los Angeles. There were parts of it I liked, but I knew I was really always going to be an East Coast guy. And in the end, I decided to come back. I went back to New Hampshire first and spent maybe a year and a half there. And I would fly out to LA and take an occasional gig. I took a remote gig. But I started getting the opportunity to work in New York City. And finally, I think it was 2012 or so, I decided to move to New York City and work here full time. And one of the first big companies that I got hired to work for was a company called Left Field Pictures, which is now ITV America. And they were a very, very busy production house. And the first job that I had there was Tiny House Nation. And it was funny because at the time, I don't think anybody really expected it to be that big of a deal. And it became very popular very quickly. I believe they wound up having 3 or 4 seasons. I worked on the first 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And then lately it's even had a bit of a resurgence. I think it's been rebooted and they're now making new episodes for it on Netflix. And that was a lot of really fun at what you'd call a build show, where you'd start out, every show starts with kind of a goal,
Right.
and then you see the project be constructed, and then at the end you have the big reveal, and hopefully everybody's happy with what's been built.
I certainly watched it a few times, and I think that show is really credited with pushing the tiny house industry along.
Absolutely, I think you're right. It definitely helped popularize that as a movement, and I think it's a movement that's still going pretty strong, honestly.
Yeah. I just wanted to move along. I mean, the one that I think a lot of folks are going to, because a lot of people have Netflix, and it's a big title on Netflix, is your most current project that's out there, which is the Jeffrey Epstein Filthy Rich. And if you could talk to us about how that project came to you, and also to start to talk a little bit about, getting into a story like that, and how you and the rest of the team on that project were approaching it.
I have to say that that was definitely one of, if not the most challenging project that I've been involved with, for a number of reasons. The way I landed the job was, again, very lucky. There's a lot of luck involved in my career, but I happened to be at the company that was producing it. I had been hired to help out with another show. And before that finished, I was approached by somebody about this mysterious project, which was only referred to as the Florida Project. It was totally top secret, all done under wraps with as much security as this place could muster. And as soon as I found out what it was about, I jumped at the opportunity to be involved. The show had already been in production at that point for nearly a year. The filmmakers' initial intent was to do an expose about Epstein while he was still alive and before he had been rearrested for his crimes. And then, in the middle of their project, he was arrested again. And the story began to change under their feet as they made the show. And so the show was put on hiatus, and no further production was done on it as the filmmakers followed the story that was developing before their eyes. After he killed himself in August, I believe, they decided that they would go ahead with the production, but they had already lost their entire team of editors to other jobs. And it was very fortunate I was in the right place at the right time. I was available. Luckily, people thought highly enough of me to recommend me for the job. And after interviewing with the show's director, I was hired and started in September and worked on it for several months. It was challenging in many ways, as I said, but the biggest challenge was finding the right tone for the story. Our goal at that point had shifted to being an expose about Epstein to more of an opportunity to give his surviving victims a voice that would be heard. And so we wanted to give them the opportunity to tell their stories in a way that felt right, that didn't feel exploitative or in bad taste. We wanted to give them as sympathetic an ear as possible. And so finding the right tone for them to tell their horrifying stories in uh, was extremely challenging. Just from the standpoint of finding the right music. One of the earlier versions of the show, the music was deemed to be a little too dark and a little too scary. And someone at Netflix, after we had been through several revisions, somebody new watched it and said, "This is too, it's too dark. We're not creating a sympathetic enough atmosphere for these women to tell their stories. It's playing more like a horror story." And it is a horror story, but they didn't want to present it in that context. So the show had a great composer, and it took a lot of doing, but we did eventually find the right tone musically for the show. In addition to that, the other great challenge of it was just the emotional impact it had on the crew. A lot of people have told me after watching it that they found it difficult to watch, and it is because it's horrifying and it's incredibly sad. But I had to watch it every day for months, and so did everybody on the team, and that was very challenging too. We all wound up bonding quite strongly on it, almost as though we had been in battle together. So,
and how long was the in terms of your work on it? How many months or longer did you actually edit it?
I was on it for this is going to be ballpark, but it's going to be about 20 weeks.
Yeah.
About 20 weeks. And I was always assigned one episode. I was doing episode 2. And but because the show went through so many revisions, all of the editors wound up getting credit on every episode because the storyline got shuffled around. We tried to play with the structure several times in terms of some kind of non-linear storytelling where we would jump around in time. And so by the time we were finished, everyone's work wound up appearing in every episode. But I still get opening title credit on episode 2 because that's largely my work.
And it debuted on Netflix in July. Am I right?
Yeah, actually.
I'm
Right,
sorry.
right before Memorial Day, I believe.
Right before Memorial Day. Okay. All right. And obviously still playing.
Netflix is always a little reluctant to share viewership numbers with the public. Yeah. But I imagine at some point they will release some information about Jeffrey Epstein, because based on the information that we have been given from them, the show has become one of their most viewed programs ever. It was released in, I believe, 190 countries around the world, and it was number 1 in many of those countries for weeks after its release. It did extremely well in non-English speaking countries, and by some estimates, and again these are estimates, but I'm led to believe that over 100 million people have watched the show so far. And for me to know that many people have seen my work is really kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, that is extraordinary. Well, let me ask first of all, remind people if you don't have Netflix, somebody does, to watch Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich. But what is going on for James Steelman now? I know you said earlier today you had to break away from your work schedule to and we thank you for this interview. But what's the project that you're working on now? Can you say?
I can. It's actually already on the air. We started airing on the Investigative Discovery Network. I think it was 5 or 6 weeks ago at this point. The show is called Chaos in Court, and it is not quite as maybe as high profile as the Jeffrey Epstein show, but we're all putting a lot of effort into it to make it the best show we can. And and I honestly, after the lockdown happened down here, I was out of work for 20 weeks. So I'm extraordinarily grateful to have any work at all, and let alone work that I can do in the comfort of my living room. But the show is called Chaos in Court. It's on Thursday nights on Investigative Discovery. And my job on it has been to be the finish editor, which means that I take the work of a team of editors and polish and finish the show and prepare it for broadcast. And before the online process.
So, James, I assume with that title, it's about courtrooms that have had fistfights, or what? Am I right? Or
it's what we call a clip show, and it's the kind of show that one would expect to see produced during a global pandemic, because we don't need to send camera crews out to shoot footage for it. The basic gist of the show is there are a number of viral videos out there of crazy things happening in courtrooms. And so this show's producers found a large number of those instances and then wrote and produced 5 to 8 minute long stories around those viral videos. We were able to send camera setups out to a panel of interview subjects. So we do have commentary from courtroom experts, as well as some of the people that were involved in the events that occur in these videos. And so each episode, it's a 1 hour show, and each episode is between 7 and 9 short stories about chaos in court, how it happened, and why it happened.
Well, great. We will be on the lookout for that, and it's great just hearing your story, being such a wonderful local story that a lot of people can identify with, and how that's what the Park Theater is. We're building an independent theater. It'll be live, but it'll be a lot of movies as well. And but the experience that you had to kind of funnel you into the career that you have is quite amazing, and an entertaining tale, to say the least. We wish you the best, James. Hopefully, when we have our new theater open and we have some symposiums on the craft of filmmaking, that we can bring you in on a seminar and show some of your films, and talk about how you approach editing, and maybe some Avid classes. Who knows?
I'd enjoy that very much. I think that would be great. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, James, for being a guest today.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
All righty. Bye bye now, and stay safe.
Thank you. You too. Cheers.
Bye. What a great story that is. And again, I think a lot of folks, when his starting story with his dad and his family business, I'm sure a lot of people have been to the Red River theaters, and they're really wonderful theaters up in Concord, right on Main Street there, downtown, and they present really a well thought out and passionate programming schedule, and the programming for the films is done by his father, Barry. So that was quite a local connection, but also some of the work, especially the Jeffrey Epstein show, is impactful, to say the least. And but Chaos in the Court, we'll take a look. That sounds like fun. It sounds like it's fun to watch during a pandemic if you're stuck at home, and obviously it's a little easier to produce if it's a pandemic. But all our best to James STEELMAN down there. And one thing that I forgot to mention at the top of the show is, and we're going to give you more information about this, is a contest coming up. And we are going to do a virtual Halloween costume contest. More details will come about this, but basically the idea is there will be a category for adults, and there will be, of course, a category for children, and you will be able to send in photographs of your costume that you put on yourself or your family or your dog. We may have a pet category as well. But please stay tuned. There'll be a form. It's going to be pretty easy. You just need to take a photograph of yourself or your child or your pet, and fill out this form online. And there's a place for you to upload your photograph. And we will have a panel of experts, and we will pick the best virtual Halloween costumes. And there will be prizes. I don't know yet what they're going to be, but there will be prizes for all categories. So hold on to your hats, folks. And as we get closer to Halloween, and this will be a little something that, again, we can do virtually and staying safe. But let's do this online, and let's see how inventive your costumes can be. Um, so that's virtual Halloween costume contest. Stay tuned. Um, and that's about it for our show this week. And we thank you for being here. Um, as always, we like to let you know that you can sponsor our program. You can also make suggestions for guests, whether they're musical or interviews, or if you just have comments about the show, you can always email them to parktv@theparktheater.org, or you can call us here at the office, 532-9300, 532-9300, and let us know what you think. If you have ideas, we're always looking for them. And other than that, we next have our thoughts at the end of every program to be safe, be healthy, be kind, be hopeful, because we can do this. And again, our best wishes to James, who sadly his neighborhood in Brooklyn is a COVID hotspot right now. So the best to him and to everyone in all those hotspots down there. And we thank James for being on the show this afternoon, this evening. And I am Steve Jackson, and I am so glad you were with us today. And we hope to see you next time. Always stay tuned on Facebook and our other social media, and we'll let you know what else is happening. But be prepared for the Halloween costume contest. Good night, everybody. Thanks again for joining us.